The year is 1625 in a small coastal village of Mounts Bay, Cornwall, England. The sea breeze blows in across calm waters onto the beach and up into small cobbled streets. Men return from the sea laden with their fish as their wives and children wait on the shore to help prepare the catch. As the sun sets on this sleepy village, families retreat to their home, close shutters and blow out candles as they head to bed. Little do these people know this is the last time they'll ever sleep in England, let alone their homes ever again. Out in the bay, dark sails flap in the wind, driving foreign boats closer and closer to shore. Strange men embark rowing boats as they move in towards the beach. As they make landfall, torches are lit, swords are drawn, and chains made ready. In just a few minutes, the peaceful world of the Mounts Bay locals is turned upside down. Suddenly, doors are kicked in, people are attacked and threatened as their goods and wares are plundered in a vicious attack. But these foreigners aren't after small trinkets, and they haven't travelled thousands of miles for the measly wealth of fishermen. No, their cargo holds lay empty, awaiting a much more valuable commodity: people. 60 men, women and children are marched down onto the beach and embarked on a ship that would see them sail thousands of miles away into far-flung exotic lands. Their rights were stripped and their dignity removed. These people went from citizens of a world power to powerless slaves in a matter of hours. And this isn't an isolated story from a small town in England, but part of a small part of a 300-year terror that plagued the coastlines of Europe. Between 1500 and 1800, some 1.2 million Europeans found themselves ripped from their homes and for sales in Arab slave markets. This is the forgotten history of the Barbary slave trade. When you hear the word slave trade, the first thing that likely pops into your mind is the transatlantic slave trade, the brutal, forced shipment of millions of people from Western Africa to the Caribbean and beyond by Western slavers. The impact of this operation often overshadows another slave trade network that didn't involve Europeans targeting Africans, but instead Africans targeting Europeans. The ancient port cities of Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli are often remembered for their history through antiquity, with Greeks, Romans, Carthaginians, and more recently, Ottomans and the famous Colonel Gaddafi of Libya. But seemingly blotched out of the history books through accident or purposeful neglect hides a dark history of slavery. Deep within these famous ports once hid the scourge of the Mediterranean and beyond, the Barbary slavers. To understand the Barbary slave trade, we have to look at its origins. The Barbary coast is a stretch of coastline starting in Morocco on the Atlantic coast and ending in Tripoli. With the unification of Spain in 1492 by the union of King Ferdinand of Castile and Isabella of Aragon, and the finale of the 770-year Reconquista with the capture of Granada, Spain was no longer in Arab hands. Thousands of Arabs and Jews either fled or were expelled from mainland Spain, relocating in the Arab Maghreb. Through either spite and vengeance or a need to sustain themselves, many of those who fled turned to piracy. At the same time, another major power was exerting its influence for the Middle East. In 1517, the Ottoman Empire conquered Egypt and unlocked a launch pad into northern Africa. As was common practice at the time, state-sponsored piracy, or privateering, was a tactic used by all the major powers to wreak havoc on their enemies without diplomatic repercussions. This, alongside the Ottoman need for slaves in the Arab slave markets, led to a loose union between the Barbary port cities and the Turks. Focusing on the Mediterranean coast, but stretching as far as the UK, Ireland, and even raids in Iceland, the 300-year slave trade saw the forced kidnapping of 1.2 million Christian Europeans. Such was the extent of the raiding that coastal populations of Spain, France, and Italy saw major depopulation as people thought twice about living in an area subject to frequent piracy. In an act as audacious as it is impressive, the Barbary Pirates seized the island of Lundy off the coast of southwest England and used it as a base of operations for 7 years and as the launch pad of their Icelandic expeditions, which saw the capture of 400 people. Taking advantage of the English Civil War, the pirates acted with almost free rein, at one point reportedly having 60 ships sailing along the south coast. The fate of captured slaves, while never good, could vary in degrees of suffering. For those condemned to the ships, a life of forced rowing ensued. Chained to their fellow slaves and their oars, many wouldn't step on land for years. Rations were sparse, and slaves were only given one change of clothes per year. To the Barbary slavers, these people were seen as little more than cattle to work until death. Women, while spared a fate on the ship, were often added to harems to become servants and sexual toys of powerful Arab men. Efforts were made by various European powers to free their captured countrymen, with envoys sent from Britain to buy the freedom of captured slaves. In one case, a delegate from England managed to buy the freedom of 200 English slaves before they ran out of money, leaving it up to the church and fundraisers to do what they could. Mediterranean powers like France and Spain opted to pay tribute to the Barbary state so that they were left alone, and during the wars of independence across the Atlantic, this privilege also extended to the fledgling USA. After winning the war, the USA was on their own, no longer under the protective wing of its French allies, leaving American ships fair game for pirates. Quickly, 130 American sailors were seized by pirates, and only after a year did a US delegation travel to the UK to meet with envoys from Algiers. After questioning the Algerian envoy, Thomas Jefferson asked what right they had to kidnap their men. The envoy replied, "By right of the Holy Quran, we are free and encouraged to enslave non-believers." After some negotiation, and against Thomas Jefferson's wishes, a sum of $800,000 was paid to the Barbary Pirates to release prisoners and avoid further escalation. In 1801, after becoming president, Jefferson cancelled these tributes, which enraged the Pasha of Tripoli, quickly declaring war on the USA. This incident saw the start of a 4-year war against the Barbary Pirates, which is known as the First Barbary War. This conflict also saw the first landing by the US Marines to defeat the Barbary army and bring the Pasha to the negotiation table. This also marked the first step of the newly formed USA taking its mark on the world stage. By 1815, the Barbary Pirates were back to their usual antics, this time taking 10 American sailors as prisoners. A prompt response from the US Navy and the threat of the bombardment of Algiers saw the release of the prisoners and $10,000 handed to the Americans. After the end of the Napoleonic Wars, the European navies could now turn their attention towards keeping oceans safe and ensuring the right of free trade. This, along with the new British mission to ban the slave trade, marked the doom for the Barbary Pirates. With the newly acquired Malta, the British wanted to secure themselves as the true owners of the Mediterranean, and the Barbary Pirates stood in their way of achieving this goal. On a diplomatic mission, a British admiral was sent to secure the safe passage of British ships, one which was agreed to by Tunis and Tripoli, but rejected by Algiers, who gave their response by massacring 200 white Christians. Utterly enraged by this move, the British admiral hastily returned to Algiers alongside 5 ships, including his flagship, the powerful 100-gun HMS Charlotte. This force was also joined by 5 Dutch frigates, combining serious firepower to the shores of Algiers. Deciding to take the fight to the Europeans, the Algerian ships maneuvered into a firing position while pretending to negotiate. Unfortunately for them, poor discipline led to one ship firing on the British before the agreed time, causing a swift and immediate response from the Allied forces. The ensuing battle and bombardment saw thousands on both sides killed, with heavy damage inflicted on ships. After a vicious duel, the Algerians soon found themselves outgunned and outmanned. And after 50,000 rounds, the 37th Fleet of the Algiers was sunk or ran aground, along with the destruction of ground batteries. After this decisive loss, the clear technological advantages of the Europeans started to reduce the effectiveness of pirates, and after the final nail in the coffin, as the French occupied North Africa, a 200-year reign of terror was brought to an end.